Hi everyone, my name is Monique.
And I'm Naveen from Before You Play.
And today we're going to be showing you how to play a game that is currently on Kickstarter called Nestlings.
Yes, this game is designed by Brandon Ohmie and published by Tangerine Games, who are helping sponsor this video. In this game, players are going to be playing as asymmetric birds who are going to try to go to different biomes, collecting resources so we can ultimately feed our nestlings, and of course, try to score the most amount of points.
That's right. This is a dice placement, resource collection, but also set collection style game that is family weight, I'd say.
Yep.
And it plays 1 to 4 players in about 30 to 60 minutes. And so today, we're going to be showing you how to play it. But before we begin, we do need to mention that everything that you see here today is considered a prototype copy of the game, which means things are subject to change in the future.
Now, if you are interested in this campaign, there's going to be a link in the description, which you can check out at your leisure. Lastly, if you like these kind of videos and you want to see more in the future, please consider subscribing.
And with that, we are ready to begin. So if you'd please direct your attention to the center of the table, we're all set up here for a 3-player game of Nestlings. Welcome to nature.
All the different biomes are present. Now, you're not seeing the 3rd-player board, but
Yes.
we're still going to teach it as if it's a 3rd-player game, or
Right.
3-player game.
And the reason for that is because at 2 players, you actually have to play with an automa, which is a little bit different from the standard rules of play.
Right.
So just imagine there's a 3rd-player board. And so like we were mentioning, in this game, each player plays as a different asymmetric bird. And so I am playing as the Malachite Kingfisher from the freshwater biome.
That's right, and I am the Rosy Finch from the Alpine.
And over the course of 4 rounds, we are going to be rolling our biome dice, trying to visit the different biomes in order to collect different food resources.
Yeah, we're hungry.
In order to feed our nestlings, fulfill gathering goals, as well as our own private nest goals. And so like we were mentioning, the game is played over the course of 4 rounds, and each round is split into 2 different phases, starting with the gathering phase. During this phase, players will place out resource tokens in the different biomes from their biome bags. And so we've already done this now. The number of resources that you place is going to be up to 1 more resource type than the number of players. And so since we're set up for a 3-player game, we have 4 different types of resources in each biome.
Yep.
Besides the grasslands, by the way, because this biome sort of operates a little bit differently, which we'll discuss a bit later. And when pulling these resources from their bags, if you ever pull out duplicate resources, you're actually supposed to stack them up to a maximum height of 2 per stack. And so that's why you see some stacks here with multiple of the same type of resource.
After placing out all the resources on the board, players are going to take their dice and roll them up. There we go.
And then, starting with the first player, players will be taking turns placing out a die into its corresponding biome in the leftmost open spot, just like that. Now, I should mention that each player's die has 1 die face for each of the 4 main types of biomes, as well as 1 additional die face of the biome that corresponds to their bird, as well as 1 blank space. And so if you don't necessarily roll the types of biomes that you're hoping to roll, before placing out your die, you can decide to re-roll any number of your resource dice.
Now I'm the next player. I rolled 2 blanks, so this might be an opportunity to roll some dice. So I want to keep these 2, and then I would re-roll my 2 blanks. There we go. That's
Nice.
something a little bit better. Now I'm going to go ahead and place one out. I'm going to place this one out into this alpine region over here.
Nice. And let's say maybe the 3rd player decides to place out into the desert, because when it's time to resolve the different biomes, the player who's on the leftmost slot here is going to break ties when it comes to determining priority order. Now, one way in which you can really increase your chances of having the highest priority order is by placing multiple dice in the same biome. So now that it's back to me, I might choose to place out another freshwater die in the freshwater biome. And so if you ever place more than 1 of the same die in the same biome, you would stack it, just like that.
So after all dice are placed, the board might look something like this.
And that ends the gathering phase. Now, just a couple of things before we move on to the next phase. Each player has a stamina track that's on the left-hand side of their player board here. And so on your turn, before placing out a die, you can choose to go down in stamina in order to change a die to any die face before placing it. Alternatively, you can choose to do this to re-roll any number of dice. And so you're going to score points, though, at the end of the game, depending on where you are in your stamina track. So each time you do this, keep in mind you are sacrificing a point. And also, if on your turn you rolled a blank, all is not lost. Blank rolls can go to the grasslands. So we'll discuss how the grasslands work in a second. In addition, each round you can choose to keep a maximum of 1 die per round. So basically, you can choose to not place a die, and doing so will give you an additional die to roll during the next round. So that's what these 2 reserved dice are at the top of your board. And now we go into the feeding phase. And so during this phase, we are going to resolve each biome 1 by 1 in a clockwise fashion, taking resources from the board in order to feed our nestlings, or discard them to complete gathering goals, or even hold them back for our nest goals at the end of the game. So, starting with the biome that has the biome resolution token over here, which in this case is the alpine biome, we're going to first see which player amongst all the players who are there has the highest priority order. Highest priority goes to the player who has the most amount of dice in that biome. In the case of a tie, which we have here, it goes to the player who is closest to the left, which is basically the spot that has the arrow on it. Basically, whoever got there first.
Which in this case is me. So I get to select all of one type of resource. So maybe I want these berries, which comes with 2 of them. And I'm going to take them for me. In addition, because I was the priority player in this biome, I get to choose one other resource and discard them back to the bag. So in this case, I see that there's 2 of this.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and just trash that back to the bag.
Put them back into the bag?
Back to the bag they go.
Wow.
Yep.
And by the way, only the first priority player gets to do that. So now it is my turn to take a resource. I might want to take this specific flower token.
Sure.
Which means this token would stay on the board. And since we're done resolving the alpine biome, we would take back our dice to show this.
Right.
Now, when gathering resources, you would typically store them below the board until you've gathered enough resources for you to claim one of the gathering goal cards, or until the end of the game in order to score your nest goal card. So as you can see, I am 1 towards my goal card here.
I might be 2 towards my goal card.
Now, as you may notice, each player has a resource ring on their player board. And so each time you gain a resource for the very first time in the game, you're going to take its corresponding wedge off of your player board and place it in the corresponding biome color.
Yeah.
At the end of each round, you're going to score 1 point for each of these wedges that are on your resource ring. And so since I added this wedge in the first round of the game, this is going to score me 4 points, basically.
Right. Every round it's going to score once. There's 4 rounds of the game.
Exactly.
Now, even though I took 2 of these berries, there's still only 1 of those resource wedges. So let's go ahead and put that there, just so I know that I have that.
Now, the last thing is if you were to take resources from your bird's native biome, just like Naveen did here, because he's the rosy finch from the alpine biome,
Yep.
you have to decide whether you want to keep those resources for your goals or if you want to feed your nestlings with them. So on your player board, there are 4 spaces here, and these are only for resources that are gathered from your native biome. So I'm looking at freshwater resources.
Right.
If you choose to feed your nestlings with them, you're going to place the resources in those spaces, and at the end of the round, you're going to score those number of points for them. Now, if Naveen decides not to feed his nestlings with these tokens, because you said you have a goal for these
Maybe I want to
strawberries,
keep
right?
them for those, yeah.
For each resource he chooses to withhold, you actually have to place a hungry nestling token in the rightmost spot. And so any spot that has a hungry nestling token cannot be fed. These spaces can actually hold up to 2 of these tokens. And so if you ever have to place a third, then you would block off the third spot and so on.
Right.
So those are going to be some nestlings that remain hungry for a long time.
Now, this is a prototype copy of the game, so these cubes will not be in the game. They'll be something different.
And once you've resolved all 4 biomes, then you always end by resolving the grasslands. So the grasslands is sort of like a wild biome because you can actually place any die face of value here. But if you have a blank, blanks can only be placed into the grasslands. It's also resolved in the same way in that you also look at the number of dice in order to determine first priority. But when taking resources, you're actually going to choose from the resources that are still left on the board. The difference is that the first priority player does not actually discard any resources when they take. In addition, whoever the first priority player is going to be the first player for the next round. And whoever has the first player marker at the end of the game is going to score 3 points. So there's a bit of incentive there. And that's essentially how the feeding phase works. And so just a couple of things before we discuss end of round scoring. Each game, you're going to play with 3 different gathering goal objectives. And so these gathering goals have a certain number and type of resources that you're going to need to collect in order to score. During the round, as soon as you collect all of the resources that are shown on the gathering goal card, you discard them immediately and you claim the leftmost available point space. Since this is technically a 3-player game, I would score the 5 points on this card. And these points you gain at the end of the game. Now, as you can see, the gathering goals show more and more resources on them, with this very top one requiring you to actually have a wild resource. And so in each biome bag, there is 1 wild resource token. You would need to collect this in order to score this topmost card. Now, this may seem a bit difficult, but there is another way in which you can gain some of the resource tokens that you need, and that is by completing entire colors on your resource ring.
As soon as a player is able to complete an entire section of a biome, then you're able to claim one of the two different benefits that are on either side of it.
And these bonuses are going to be stuff like completing a gathering goal with one fewer resource, or adding a biome segment onto your resource ring, taking a discarded resource token, etc. Now, as soon as the Grasslands biome has been resolved, the round ends, and we go into end-of-round scoring as well as some end-of-round procedures.
This is when you're going to decide if you're going to either feed your nestlings or withhold from them and get those hungry nestling tokens.
That's right. And if you do have these hungry nestling tokens like Naveen has, there are a couple of things that you can do at the end of a round in order to remove them. You can choose to spend 3 different resources in order to remove 1. So it's quite expensive. Keep that in mind. Alternatively, you can choose to spend 3 different resources to draw a random resource from a biome bag, or you can spend 4 different resources to either gather one of the leftover resources on the board or to take an additional die for the next round. And so this is how you can roll up to 6 dice.
Each of these benefits can only be performed once per round.
Yes. And at this point, you would score all the points earned by feeding your nestlings, discarding these resource tokens afterwards, as well as 1 point per wedge that's on your resource ring. Then you set up for the next round by discarding any leftover resources back to their biome bags and rotating the resolution token clockwise.
At the end of the 4th round, players are going to go into endgame scoring.
By this point, players would have earned a few victory points throughout the game. You would then add any points from completed gathering goal cards. You'd also earn points from your stamina track, depending on where your token is at the end of the game. If you completed your entire resource ring, that'll earn you 7 points. Whoever has the first player marker also earns 3 points. And finally, each player will score their nest goal cards. So nest goals are a private objective that you would choose between 2 cards at the beginning of the game. And basically, each goal card shows 2 different types of resources that you are looking to collect by the end of the game. You are only going to score for one of these 2 resources, though. You cannot combine them. And depending on how many you've accrued is how many points you'll earn. So if I have 5 of this type of flower, I'll get 9 points.
Right.
And at that point, whoever has the most points wins. Now, there is an optional bird ability module that you could play with, and that basically gives each player an asymmetric ability that they can use once during the entire game. For example, as a Rosie Finch, Naveen can decide to keep a resource instead of discarding it from the Alpine if he has first priority there. And when using the ability, you would discard the bird token from your resource ring. And so at the end of the game, if you never use your bird ability, you'll score 3 additional points. And that's essentially how you play Nestlings. Now, if you're playing a 2-player game, you would actually play with an automa, which we didn't discuss here today, but if you'd like to learn more about it, we've included a link to their Kickstarter down below.
Now, of course, this is a prototype copy of the game, so some of these rules may be tweaked in the final production, so just be aware of that. We hope the video was helpful for you. If you'd like to see more like this in the future, please consider subscribing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.